moment my glass touched my lips, I already knew one of us would not walk out of that room the same. Before I tell you how that night unfolded, let me say this quietly and clearly. If you have ever felt something was wrong inside your own family, if your instincts ever whispered danger while everyone else smiled and clapped, keep watching. And when this story ends, tell me what lesson you took from it and what city you are watching from. My name is not important yet. What matters is that I am 69 years old, retired, and I spent most of my life in a profession where hesitation meant disaster and precision meant survival. For decades, I was trained to read what people did not say, to notice the smallest tremor in a hand, the slightest change in breathing, the moment when something invisible turned dangerous. I thought retirement would quiet those instincts. I was wrong. The ballroom was beautiful that night. Soft lights reflected off polished floors. White linens covered every table. A live quartet played familiar melodies that made people lean closer to each other and smile. It was our 40th wedding anniversary, and my wife stood beside me radiant and calm, holding my hand the way she had since we were young and uncertain and broke. 200 guests filled the room, old colleagues, neighbors, friends we had buried, and friends who had buried others. It was meant to be a celebration of endurance. Everyone thought that was what it was. I knew better. For 4 months, I had been watching my son-in-law test the edges of my life, the way a thief tests a locked door. Light pressure at first, casual comments disguised as concern, questions framed as jokes, suggestions offered with a smile. He never pushed too hard, never all at once. He was patient, confident. He believed time was on his side. It started with my memory. Had I forgotten where I parked the car? Did I remember the name of a neighbor I had known for years? Did I ever feel confused in the mornings? He asked these things at dinner, in front of others, laughing as if it was harmless curiosity. When I answered honestly, when I admitted that, yes, sometimes names slipped or keys went missing, his eyes would flicker with something sharp and satisfied before softening again. Then it moved to my schedule. He offered to help manage appointments. He suggested consolidating accounts to make things easier for me. He spoke about protecting my wife, about making sure everything was organized just in case. Always just in case. My daughter changed, too. That was harder to watch than anything else. She stopped calling as often. When she did, her voice sounded tight, rehearsed, as if someone else was listening. She lost weight. She stopped laughing the way she used to, the way she had when she was a child, and would fall asleep in the back seat with her head against the window. When I asked if she was happy, she smiled too quickly and said, "Of course." I wanted to believe her. By the time the invitations for our anniversary went out, I already knew I was being prepared for something. Not harmed yet, not openly. Prepared, reduced, positioned. That was when I decided the party could not just be a celebration. It had to be a test. As the evening unfolded, I watched the room the way I used to watch an operating theater. I noted where people stood, who moved when, who avoided my eyes. My son-in-law hovered near the drinks table longer than necessary. He laughed loudly, touched shoulders, played the role of devoted family man. No one suspected him. That was his greatest strength. At one point, he caught my gaze and lifted his glass slightly in my direction, a gesture of respect, of affection. I returned it, slowly, calmly. He did not look away first. That was when I knew the move was coming. I squeezed my wife's hand as applause rose for an impromptu speech someone was giving. She smiled at me, warm and unguarded. She did not know what I knew. I had made sure of that. Her reaction had to be real. Everyone's did. When the waiter approached with champagne, my son-in-law stepped in smoothly, insisting on delivering the glasses himself. He said it was a special night. He said he wanted to make the toast personal. The room agreed. People like gestures like that. They mistake them for sincerity. He handed my wife her glass first, then turned to me. I took it from him, felt the stem between my fingers, watched the bubbles rise through the pale gold liquid. And in that instant, every month of quiet observation, every sleepless night, every piece of evidence I had collected settled into place. This was the moment he had chosen, the moment he believed I was weakest. If you have ever wondered how betrayal really begins, it does not start with violence. It starts with a smile, a raised glass, and the certainty that the person across from you thinks you are finished. I was just getting started. I did not drink the champagne right away. I held the glass loosely, letting the toast wash over me as applause rippled through the room. My wife smiled. Our friends cheered. Someone shouted a joke about 40 years being a life sentence. Laughter followed. To anyone watching, I was just another aging man enjoying his moment. Inside, I was counting. Not seconds, patterns. Because the truth is, what my son-in-law was doing did not begin that night. That night was only the conclusion of a process that had been unfolding quietly, deliberately, for months. What he was really trying to steal from me was not my money, not yet. He was trying to steal my credibility, my voice, my authority over my own life. It began subtly enough that I almost missed it. A suggestion here, a comment there. He would lean back in his chair after dinner and say things like, "You have built so much. It would be a shame if something happened and it all became complicated." Or, "I read an article about men our age not realizing when they are slipping. It is scary how common it is." Always framed as concern, always delivered with a smile. At first, I brushed it off. Pride can make you careless. Experience can make you arrogant. I told myself I had spent a lifetime making hard decisions under pressure. I was not suddenly fragile just because my hair had gone gray. But then he started bringing other people into the conversation. At a small gathering in early spring, he introduced a man he claimed was a longtime family friend. Polished, calm, soft-spoken. He said the man worked in cognitive health, not in a formal way, he explained, more as an advisor, someone who helped families navigate aging issues before they became crises. The man asked me questions while we ate, casual questions. Had I ever walked into a room and forgotten why I was there? Did I ever struggle to recall dates? Did I ever feel foggy after a poor night of sleep? I answered honestly. Anyone my age would have. The man nodded slowly, thoughtfully, the way professionals do when they want you to take their concerns seriously. Nothing was said outright. That was the brilliance of it. No accusations, no diagnoses, just planted doubt. After that night, I could feel the shift. My daughter began checking in more often, but not in the way she used to. Her questions felt scripted. Are you sleeping well? Are you eating enough? Did you take your medication? When I asked what medication she meant, she laughed it off and said she must have misspoken. Once, I overheard her whispering with her husband in the kitchen. My name came up, then stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I started noticing things missing. Papers moved, a folder on my desk rearranged, a financial statement left open where I would see it. Not stolen, just displaced, just enough to make someone wonder if they had forgotten. That is how erosion works, not by force, but by suggestion. The moment that confirmed my suspicions came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I received a call from a clinic I had never contacted, reminding me of an appointment I had not made. When I asked who scheduled it, they gave my son-in-law's name. They said he was concerned about my recent confusion and wanted to be proactive. I canceled the appointment. Then I started asking my own questions. I checked records, backgrounds, licenses, quietly, methodically. The man introduced as an advisor was not what he claimed. His credentials did not match his story. His history contained gaps, complaints, settlements, patterns. I recognized the structure immediately. I had seen it before, not in families, but in systems. Create doubt. Document small inconsistencies. Introduce authority. Remove agency. Once someone is labeled unreliable, everything they say afterward becomes suspect. That is when I understood the scope of what was happening. This was not about care. It was about control. If they could convince the right people that I was slipping, then decisions could be made for me. Accounts managed on my behalf. Documents signed in my name. My objections dismissed as confusion. I thought of my daughter. I wanted to believe she was being manipulated, that she did not fully understand what she was participating in. But the more I observed her, the harder that became. She avoided my eyes when money was mentioned. She flinched when her husband spoke for me. She stayed silent when I corrected him. Silence, I learned, can be louder than agreement. By the time the anniversary party was planned, I was no longer asking myself if something was wrong. I was asking how far they were willing to go.
And more importantly, how soon. That was when I stopped reacting and started preparing. I did not confront anyone. I did not warn my wife. I did not change my routines. I let them believe their strategy was working. Because when someone is trying to erase you quietly, the most dangerous thing you can do is let them think they are succeeding. And as I stood in that ballroom, holding a glass meant to make me disappear, I knew the slow part was over. Whatever came next would be fast. The night after I canceled that appointment, I did not sleep. I lay awake beside my wife, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation from the past year. I was not afraid in the way people expect fear to look. There was no panic, no racing heart. What I felt was colder than that. It was the calm that comes right before you accept an unpleasant truth. By morning, I stopped asking whether this was happening and started asking how deep it went. I began with the simplest step. I pulled public records, quietly. From my home office early in the morning before anyone could interrupt me. I looked into my son-in-law's professional history, the one he spoke about so confidently at dinners. The impressive career, the connections, the supposed success. The story did not hold. Licenses that should have been active were expired. Affiliations he bragged about did not list his name. The timeline of his employment shifted depending on the source. Small inconsistencies at first, the kind most people overlook because they want to believe. I did not overlook them. I dug deeper. What I found was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Lawsuits quietly settled. Clients who no longer existed. Addresses that led to empty offices. Debt hidden behind temporary cash infusions. He was not managing wealth. He was chasing it. Then I looked at his mother. That discovery made my hands shake for the first time.
Her financial history was worse. Multiple refinances, properties transferred and transferred back, a trail of businesses that appeared and vanished within months. And threaded through it all were names I recognized from my earlier research. The same so-called advisors, the same clinics, the same legal mechanisms, guardianships, emergency interventions, assets moved under the justification of care. That was when the truth crystallized. This was not opportunism. This was a system.
They did not want a piece of what I had built. They wanted all of it. And they knew exactly how to take it without ever looking like criminals. All they needed was one thing: a declaration that I was no longer competent to object. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Images of other lives flickered through my mind. Men and women my age who had trusted the wrong people, who had signed the wrong paper, who had spoken up too late. Then I thought of my daughter. That was the hardest part. I wanted to believe she was being used, that she was afraid, that she did not understand the implications of what she was allowing. But belief does not survive evidence. I reviewed months of messages, emails she thought I never saw, conversations that became colder once money entered the discussion, moments where she deferred to her husband when I spoke directly to her. There was a message she sent him late one night that broke something in me. It was short, careful, calculated. Once it is done, we will finally be secure. Not we will be safe, not we will be okay. Secure. I closed my laptop and sat in silence for a long time. Grief is strange when the person you are mourning is still alive. I realized then that the daughter I raised was gone, replaced by someone I did not recognize, someone willing to trade her father's autonomy for comfort. I allowed myself exactly 1 week to feel that loss. 1 week to remember the little girl who rode on my shoulders at parades, who cried when I left for night shifts, who once told me she wanted to be brave like me when she grew up. After that week, I made a decision. I would not confront them. I would not plead. I would not try to fix what they had chosen to break. I would document everything. I reached out to someone I trusted from another life, someone who understood discretion and patience. I did not explain everything at first. I did not need to. I asked one question. If someone were trying to quietly remove a person from their own life, how would they do it?
The answer came back without hesitation. Slowly, legally, invisibly. From that point on, every move I made had a purpose. I stopped pushing back in conversations. I allowed comments about my age to go unanswered. I let my son-in-law schedule things I would later cancel. I smiled when he suggested simplifying my affairs. I became exactly what they wanted me to be: complacent. Because once I understood the scope of what they were attempting, I understood something else just as clearly. They believed I was alone. They believed my age made me predictable. They believed they had time. They were wrong on all 3 counts. And as the anniversary date approached, I realized something chilling and useful at the same time. They were accelerating, which meant they were nervous, which meant the next move would not be subtle. It would be decisive. And that meant, finally, I knew where to end this. Once I accepted that the next move would be decisive, everything became simpler. Not easier, simpler. In my old profession, there was a moment before every difficult procedure when the noise faded and the path narrowed. You stopped thinking about outcomes and focused on execution. This felt the same. I stopped wondering whether I should act and started deciding how. The first rule was silence. I did not tell my wife. That decision weighed on me, but it was necessary. Her reactions had to be unguarded. Her concern had to be real. Anyone watching her would read sincerity, not performance. I hated keeping something from the woman who had shared my life for 4 decades, but protection sometimes looks like distance. The second rule was documentation. I began recording everything.
Not dramatically, not in a way that would alert anyone. Conversations captured through ordinary devices, messages archived and backed up, calendars synced, financial activity mirrored and time-stamped. I treated my own life like a case file because that was what it had become. I reached out to a man I had not spoken to in years, someone I trusted precisely because he no longer moved in my circles. He worked quietly. He asked few questions. He understood the value of patience. When I told him I needed help observing without being seen, he did not ask why. He simply asked when. Within weeks, patterns emerged that confirmed my suspicions. Meetings that coincided with changes in my accounts. Calls that happened only when my wife was out of the house. Documents drafted, but never sent to me directly. They were preparing to act, and they were doing it under the assumption that I was losing my grip. I made sure to reinforce that belief. I missed a lunch on purpose and apologized later, saying I had mixed up the time. I asked my daughter to repeat a detail she had already explained, then laughed it off. I let my son-in-law take the lead in conversations about planning and logistics. Each small concession made him bolder. Confidence is dangerous when it is unearned. The anniversary party was my idea. I presented it as a gift to my wife, something joyful, something she deserved. She loved the idea immediately. 40 years together felt like an accomplishment worth marking. She began planning with enthusiasm, calling friends, choosing colors, debating music. I encouraged every detail. What she did not know was that I was choosing something else. Witnesses. 200 of them. People from different parts of our lives. People who knew us separately and together. Doctors, neighbors, friends who had seen me make decisions under pressure and never falter. People who would remember what happened not as a rumor, but as something they saw with their own eyes. If something went wrong, it would not disappear quietly. As the date approached, the tension in my son-in-law became visible to me in ways others missed. His jokes grew sharper, his patience thinner. He pressed harder about logistics, about timing, about who would be where during the event. He asked questions that revealed his assumptions. Assumptions that I would be at the center of attention. Assumptions that I would drink when told. Assumptions that if something happened to me publicly, no one would question his concern. I let him assume. Behind the scenes, I coordinated with people who understood what was at stake. Not everyone, only those who needed to know. Each person was given a small role, nothing that looked suspicious on its own. A delayed speech, a change in seating, a pause where there normally would not be one. In complex operations, redundancy matters. I built it into everything. I also prepared for failure. If he chose a different method, if he delayed, if he backed out. I made sure that whatever happened, evidence already existed to protect my wife and myself. Accounts secured, powers limited, access restricted, quietly, legally. By the time the anniversary arrived, there was nothing left to improvise. I woke that morning calm. My wife was nervous in the way people are before happy events. She laughed at breakfast. She teased me about my tie.
She had no idea that by nightfall, the shape of our family would change forever. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, lines around my eyes, hands that had steadied others for decades. They saw that and thought it meant weakness. They did not understand that age does not dull instinct. It sharpens it. When we arrived at the venue, everything unfolded exactly as planned. The lights, the music, the crowd. My son-in-law greeted guests with practiced warmth. My daughter stayed close to him, smiling carefully. I moved through the room slowly, deliberately, observing without interfering.
Waiting. Because the most effective trap is the one that feels like a gift. And by the time the champagne was brought out, I knew without doubt that they believed this night belonged to them. It did, just not in the way they expected. By the time the champagne appeared, the room had settled into that comfortable rhythm people fall into when they believe the night's biggest moments are behind them. Dinner plates had been cleared, music softened, conversations blended into a low hum of contentment. Laughter came easier now. No one was watching closely anymore. That was exactly what he was waiting for. I saw my son-in-law before anyone else did. He moved with intention, not rushing, not hesitating. He positioned himself near the drinks table, as if it were a coincidence, greeting guests as they passed, accepting compliments, playing the role he had practiced for months. To everyone else, he was just being helpful. To me, he was setting the stage. 2 champagne flutes had been placed slightly apart from the others, identical to the rest, but not poured at the same time. He had arranged that earlier. I knew because I had watched him do it, smiling as if he were doing the staff a favor. He picked one up, turning his body just enough to shield his hands from casual view. His fingers dipped briefly into his jacket pocket. The movement was small, almost elegant. Something pale vanished into the glass and dissolved instantly. No drama, no rush. Experience teaches you that the most dangerous actions rarely look dramatic. I did not react. I did not stiffen. I did not narrow my eyes. I did not change my expression at all. I simply noted the time, the angle of his body, the way his shoulders relaxed afterward. He turned, still holding the glass, and scanned the room until his eyes found mine. For a fraction of a second, something passed between us. Recognition, anticipation, confidence. Then he smiled. The waiter began collecting glasses to distribute for the toast, but my son-in-law intercepted him smoothly. He placed a hand on the tray and said loudly enough for those nearby to hear that he would handle it, that this toast was important to him. People like gestures like that. They trust the person who steps forward confidently. He walked toward us with 2 glasses in hand. My wife stood beside me, radiant, unaware. She had spent weeks planning this night. Every detail mattered to her. She deserved joy, not suspicion. I reminded myself of that as he approached. He handed her the first glass. Then he turned to me. His voice was warm, affectionate. "Dad," he said, "a special vintage. I had it brought in just for tonight." I took the glass from him. The stem felt cool against my fingers. I lifted it slightly, watching the bubbles rise, the light catching in the liquid. To anyone watching, it was a normal moment, a father-in-law receiving a thoughtful gesture. Inside, everything slowed. I was not angry. I was not afraid. I felt the same focus I used to feel before making an incision. The world narrowing to what mattered. "Thank you," I said calmly. "That's very thoughtful." He nodded, satisfied, and stepped back toward his mother, who watched us with thinly veiled excitement. They believed the hardest part was over.
It was just beginning. I excused myself, saying I needed a moment. No one questioned it. No one ever questions an older man taking a break. That assumption has power. As I moved through the room, I made sure to keep the glass visible in my hand. I did not set it down. I did not sip from it. I let it become part of the image they were forming of me. Near the back of the room, I stopped beside an old friend seated at a small table. He looked up and smiled, praising the party, commenting on how beautiful my wife looked. I leaned in and spoke quietly. "In 3 minutes," I said, "I need you to stand and make a toast. Make it about my wife. Take your time. Tell a story." He blinked, surprised, but nodded. We had known each other too long for explanations to be necessary. I returned to my place beside my wife. My son-in-law watched me the entire time. His eyes followed my path, flicked briefly to the glass in my hand, then away again. He was checking his work, measuring his success. The speech began right on cue. As my friend stood and spoke, the room's attention shifted completely. Laughter rose. Applause followed a familiar story. Heads turned toward the speaker. Glasses were set down temporarily as people settled in to listen. That was the window. I stepped slightly to the side, closer to where my son-in-law was standing. I let my posture sag just a bit, enough to sell the image. I reached out as if to steady myself and brushed against the back of his chair. The contact was gentle, casual. My glass touched his. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said aloud, letting my voice carry just enough. Clumsy old man. He waved it off without looking at me, his attention fixed on the speech, on the moment he believed was stretching toward its inevitable conclusion. When I straightened, the glasses had changed places. Nothing dramatic, nothing noticeable, just a shift in position that no one registered. The speech ended. Applause filled the room. The host called for everyone to raise their glasses. 200 hands lifted champagne into the air. "To 40 years," someone shouted. "To love," another voice added. We drank. I watched him as I took a measured sip from the clean glass now in my hand. He drained his in 2 eager swallows. He was smiling. And in that moment, with music swelling and voices overlapping and joy filling the room, I understood something with absolute clarity. The toast he had prepared was never meant for me. It was meant to reveal him, and it already had. At first, nothing happened. That was the most unsettling part. The room stayed bright, music continued, glasses were lowered to tables, conversations restarted in small, overlapping bursts as people turned back to one another, satisfied that the toast had gone as planned. My son-in-law laughed, a sharp, confident sound, and leaned toward his mother as if to comment on something amusing. He looked pleased, relaxed, victorious. I watched him carefully. 90 seconds can feel like an eternity when you are waiting for a truth to surface. His smile faltered first, just a flicker. His hand paused halfway to the table, fingers stiffening, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to do next. He blinked several times, too quickly, and frowned. Vivian noticed before anyone else. She leaned closer, her voice low, urgent. "Are you all right?" He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. His brows knit together, as if he were concentrating on forming words that would not come. He pressed his fingertips to his temple, rubbing in small circles. "I feel strange," he said finally, the words thick, uneven. The people closest to him laughed lightly, assuming he was joking, assuming this was nothing more than a reaction to alcohol. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, Someone else offered water. Then his knees buckled. Not dramatically, not in a way that drew immediate screams. He simply folded. His body sank toward the floor, as if the strength had been switched off. Chairs scraped backward. A glass shattered. Someone shouted his name. The music stopped. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. Vivian screamed then, a raw sound that cut through the room. She dropped beside him, calling his name over and over, her hands hovering helplessly over his shoulders, afraid to touch him, afraid not to. Christine pushed through the crowd and knelt beside her husband. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She was crying, sobbing hard enough to shake her body. But I saw what no one else did. She was not shocked. She was terrified, yes. Desperate, yes. But not surprised. That realization hit me harder than anything else that night.
Someone yelled for an ambulance. Another guest called emergency services. A woman near the wall said she thought he might be having a medical episode. People backed away, forming a wide, uneven circle around him. I stood where I was, my empty glass still in my hand. I did not move toward him. I did not speak. I did not rush to reassure anyone. I watched. His breathing was labored now, shallow and uneven. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. His limbs jerked once, then again, small, uncontrolled movements that made people gasp and turn away. My wife reached for me. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I placed a hand over hers, steady, grounding. "I don't know," I said softly, "but help is coming." She looked at me then, searching my face for answers I did not give her. I saw fear there, confusion, a flicker of doubt. She trusted me completely. That trust cut deeper than any accusation ever could. The sirens arrived quickly, their sound growing louder, closer, until red and white lights flashed through the tall windows of the ballroom. Paramedics pushed through the crowd with practiced urgency, voices calm and commanding. "Everyone step back. Give us space." They worked efficiently, checking vitals, asking questions, attaching monitors. Vivian hovered, frantic, trying to answer for him. Christine clutched his hand, her tears soaking into his sleeve. I noticed how she kept glancing at me. The paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher and wheeled him toward the exit. The crowd parted silently. Conversations had stopped entirely now. No one was celebrating. No one was smiling. This was not how the night was supposed to end. As they rolled him past me, his eyes opened briefly, unfocused, confused. For a moment, they locked onto mine. There was no recognition there, only fear. The doors closed behind him. The room exhaled. People began speaking in hushed tones, speculating, offering theories, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Someone asked if the party should end. Someone else suggested prayers. I turned to my wife and guided her gently toward a quieter corner of the room. "Are you all right?" she asked me, gripping my arm. I nodded. "I am." She searched my face again, as if sensing that there was more I was not saying. I kissed her forehead and told her to sit down. I would explain everything soon. As the guests slowly dispersed, I stood alone for a moment in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by overturned chairs and half-empty glasses. This was the moment everything shifted. What had been a private plan was now public consequence. What had been quiet manipulation was now a spectacle witnessed by 200 people. And as I watched the staff begin to clean up the remnants of celebration, I understood something with painful clarity. No matter what happened next, there was no going back. The truth had been set in motion.
and it would not stop here. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals do at night, clean and cold and unforgiving. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Shoes squeaked against polished floors. Time moved strangely there, stretching and compressing without warning. I knew this place well, too well. I had walked these corridors for decades, had stood on both sides of doors like the one my son-in-law had just been wheeled through. Tonight, I stood on the wrong side. My wife sat beside me in a hard plastic chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had stopped asking questions. That silence was heavier than panic. Across the room, Vivian paced back and forth, heels clicking sharply against the tile. Christine sat hunched forward, her face buried in her hands. No one spoke to me. That was not an accident.
When the doctor finally came out, he was young, composed, careful with his words. He addressed the family collectively, then paused when he reached the part that mattered. "Your husband is stable," he said, looking at Christine. "We performed gastric decontamination. He should recover fully." Vivian collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. But the doctor was not finished. "We found a high concentration of a powerful antipsychotic in his system. This was not an adverse reaction or an interaction. It appears to have been administered deliberately." The air changed. Vivian's sobs stopped abruptly. Christine's hands fell away from her face. My wife turned to look at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The hospital has notified law enforcement," the doctor continued. "They will want to speak with all of you." The word deliberate hung between us like smoke. The detective arrived less than 20 minutes later. She was calm, middle-aged, observant in a way that suggested she noticed everything, even when she appeared not to. She introduced herself and asked to speak with each of us separately. When it was my turn, I followed her into a small consultation room. She closed the door gently and gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what you know," she said. So I did. I told her about the months of pressure disguised as concern, the fake professional introduced to question my mental capacity, the appointment scheduled without my consent, the missing documents, the surveillance, the recordings, the financial trail. I told her about the party, about the glasses. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, studying my face. "You are telling me you knew this was coming and allowed it to play out?" she said carefully. I nodded. "And you have proof of intent?" "I do." She did not ask me to produce it immediately. That told me she already suspected more than she was saying. When she left the room, I sat alone for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the hospital beyond the door. I felt no triumph, only a steady resolve. The questioning continued late into the night. Vivian's story shifted each time she told it. Christine cried, denied, then went silent. My wife answered simply, truthfully, unaware until now of the depth of the deception that had been unfolding around her. By morning, warrants had been issued. The house where my daughter lived was searched. Devices were seized, accounts frozen. The man introduced as an advisor was brought in for questioning and did not hold up well under scrutiny. The evidence did the rest. Audio recordings of conversations planning an intervention that was never about care. Messages outlining timelines and contingencies. Draft documents prepared in advance, ready to be filed the moment I appeared unfit to object. There was one recording that ended any remaining doubt. My son-in-law's voice, confident and unguarded, explaining that after the party everything would be simple.
that I would be evaluated, declared incapable, that my wife would be persuaded or sidelined, that control would follow quickly. Christine's voice was on that recording too, quieter, hesitant, but present. When confronted with it, she broke. She did not scream. She did not argue. She simply looked very small and very tired and asked what would happen next. She was given a choice: cooperate fully or be charged alongside the others. She chose to cooperate. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Once deception replaces care, sympathy evaporates. Charges were filed, arrests were made. The narrative they had tried to build collapsed under the weight of its own documentation. At the arraignment, I sat behind my wife and watched my son-in-law stand where defendants stand, his confidence gone, his posture collapsed inward. He did not look at me. Christine sat elsewhere, separate from him, her face pale and hollow. I did not feel vindicated. I felt finality. By the time the case reached court, there was nothing left to reveal. The truth had already done its work. As the verdicts were read and sentences handed down, I realized something quietly profound. They had spent months trying to erase me. In the end, they erased themselves. When it was over, my wife took my hand and asked the question she had been holding since the night of the party.
Why didn't you tell me sooner? I looked at her then, really looked at her, and answered honestly. Because I needed them to believe I was alone. I needed them to show who they really were. And they did. The house was quieter than I remembered, not empty, just different. Sound carries differently after a truth has passed through a family. Doors close more softly. Footsteps pause before crossing rooms that once felt shared. My wife and I learned that silence could be peaceful again if we treated it with care. The weeks after the verdict moved slowly. Paperwork replaced panic. Routine returned in fragments. Mornings with coffee by the window. Evenings watching the light fade across the water. We spoke about ordinary things at first. Groceries, weather, the neighbors. Then gradually we spoke about what we had lost. There are losses that cannot be measured by money or time. I did not lose my estate. I did not lose my autonomy. What I lost was simpler and heavier. The certainty that love alone protects you. The belief that family will always choose care over convenience. Those illusions do not come back once they are broken. My wife grieved in her own way. She asked if she had missed signs, if she had failed as a mother. I told her the truth. Responsibility belongs to choices, not hopes. We raised a child with values. She chose something else. That choice was hers to carry. We did not speak to our daughter after the trial, not out of anger, out of clarity. Forgiveness is not a performance. It requires accountability and time. Neither had arrived. What surprised me most was not the aftermath in our home, but the messages that followed from people we barely knew. Friends of friends, neighbors of neighbors, people who had watched from the edges and recognized pieces of their own lives in our story. They spoke of pressure, of subtle control, of being told they were forgetting things that they knew they were not. Predators thrive on isolation, on politeness, on the fear of making a scene. That is why they choose age as their weapon. They believe it comes with compliance, with embarrassment, with silence. They are wrong. Age comes with pattern recognition, with patience, with the understanding that time reveals what force cannot. I did not survive decades of responsibility by accident. I learned to wait, to watch, to act only when action mattered. One afternoon,
A letter arrived that I still keep in my desk drawer. It was from a young man whose grandmother had been caught in a similar web years earlier. Her case had been dismissed as unfortunate, inevitable. After our trial, it was reopened. Assets were recovered. Her name was cleared. Justice does not always arrive on time. Sometimes it arrives sideways. That letter reminded me that the story did not end with us. It moved outward. It warned others. It disrupted a pattern that depended on secrecy to survive. If there is a lesson here, it is not about revenge or cleverness. It is about attention. Pay attention when concern feels rehearsed, when help arrives uninvited, when your voice is slowly replaced by someone else speaking on your behalf. Pay attention when love asks you to surrender your authority, quietly. Silence is not peace if it is imposed. I am not angry anymore. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing useful behind. What remains is resolve, a commitment to speak when something feels wrong, to encourage others to do the same. My wife and I celebrated our anniversary quietly the following year. No speeches, no toasts. Just the two of us and a view we have loved for a long time. It was enough. I am still standing. And if you are watching this and recognize pieces of your own life in it, trust yourself. Ask questions. Get help. Do not assume age means weakness. Experience is not a liability. It is a defense. Before I go, let me ask you something. What lesson did you take from this story? And what city are you watching from? If this resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. Your voice matters more than you think. The light outside is fading now. Dinner is ready. I will join my wife at the table, grateful for what remains, and clear about what does not. That clarity, more than anything else, is what survived betrayal.